This brings us to the ZU2 footage and side of the show, as it's called by the fandom. Saban commissioned Toei themselves to shoot more action and combat footage, specifically set up to match, not any Zyuranger material, but the stories the Saban production staff were scripting. Thus, there were no longer issues with bad story adaptations for the material, though many of these stories were thus stupid because they were entirely on their own for this stuff and thus had no framework to execute better concepts. Though it gave the production staff a leg up in learning how to actually build such plots all on their own, so they would suck less the following years. And also as consequence made this one of the longest seasons in the Tokusatsu genre. A show hadn't seen this many episodes in a season since Changeman. They also shot more original action footage to interweave the stories, and is notable for the progress and shift to doing much of it themselves the following season, even though the post-Doomsday episodes could get really damn boring. The ZU2 footage actually lasted about a fifth into Season 2, even though they began recutting Dairanger mecha footage for Zord battles after the events of the Mutiny.
Personally, while I don't think this mid-season is entirely awful, I'm of the opinion that Power Rangers actually works best with around 40 episodes a season to not overstay its welcome. It's concise, allows more flexibility with the Sentai footage as it can just drop or disregard any bad content, and permits it to be paced out pretty evenly over a year with ample time for reruns. Shorter than that, and you run into the problem of what needs to be adapted, crowding out what original content can be added to justify the footage or not make the characters out as flat or terrible people due to the lack of downtime. Of the ones that were reduced to 32 episodes or less per Sentai used, only RPM really feels like it pulled it off.
But yeah, 40 episodes a year I feel results in a good balance of story arc and filler character developmental episodes, and doesn't flood the airwaves with mindless content, or by proxy leaves so massive gaps that all people see are endless reruns.
The key here being you need to run them all within a consecutive 12 months to really get that effectiveness, as doing it over 2 years makes people lose interest, as has been shown with Samurai, Megaforce, and Dino Charge by this point. I hate the mid-season splits Nickelodeon's contract forced on the show. It's really shooting themselves in the foot.
The ZU2 footage was also notable for giving Ron Wasserman the opportunity to create more music for the show. The soundtrack, while still keeping the same overall stylization, had much more variation in what tracks got used, and we got a lot of more varied fight music that would reach its climax mid-season 2. And also the plots began to shift Bulk and Skull more properly being away from civilian antagonists to them being bumbling jerks with something to prove to the world. But as a consequence, none of these new monsters play into Zyuranger's running thematic of Western mythological fantasies for the creatures, just going along a more general animal thematic. Granted, the ZU2 stuff doesn't show up immediately. Since they'd skipped or amalgamated down 10 episodes of Zyuranger, they first started out recycling old footage alongside that which they'd skipped over, such as Rita's Seed of Evil, which takes advantage of the unused Dora Narcissus alongside about 6 other episodes of scenes to show that Rita may be down, but she ain't out. Granted, it's wrapped in a stupid environmentalism episode, but it's notable as these episodes began to focus more on 1 or 2 Rangers at a time for their events, with the others backing away to permit the spotlighting of each of the cast in turn. And a Pig surprise is similarly weird on this, with Rita recreating Pudgy Pig, once again serving as a proto-Zedd plot as it's made from a transmuted pig that Bulk and Skull end up adopting and bonding with at a pet adoption event, but is made with recut footage that the show already used.
To be fair though, the show already established that all of Rita's monsters can be remade, since they're just clay sculptures of Finsters. Something I'm amazed Zyuranger never took advantage of to do a recycled Monster Mash episode like most Sentai do, since Leprechaun never did the same. Aside from spawning more foot soldiers, obviously.
Something fishy is in turn the debut of the renamed Daigoyo as the Light Sword, and is notorious amongst viewers for the Samurai Rangers plotting to torture Antonio to remove a monster created fear of fish.
The hell? How did this get in here?
Yeah, that Samurai episode was a ripoff of, ironically, this one, in how its overarching plot involved Billy needing to overcome a fear of fish, augmented immensely by Rita's magic. Difference is, this was more about Billy's character than a series of stupid gags. Though I could swear in one of the previous episodes Billy interacted with fish or fish-based foodstuffs without a problem. It's also the real beginning of the ZU2 works. Lions and Blizzards has Zack finally managed to catch Angela's attention, but only after he helps her clean up after some type of schoolyard games. that once more feel like they should be done by grade schoolers. However, the opportunity for a date is lost, thanks to a Rita-based monster attack, the chimera created from the trophy of the prior event, meaning its progress with her is, of course, back to zero.
Should have probably moved on by now, dude. Persistence is one thing, stalkerish pursuance is totally another.
Crystal of Nightmares is another clip show episode, set up through the framework of dreams sent to them by the titular crystal, which robs them of all their confidence, which they need to work past to destroy the crystal, but is otherwise a dull, unremarkable event if not for three things. 1. From this point onwards, Goldar would sport a slightly different facial structure to allow him to be more expressive, and instead of his snout moving up and down when he talked, it was now the lower jaw. 2. During the dream sequences, Bulk and Skull pilot the Megazord, inferring to some, once more, their better nature under the incompetent bullying. And 3. This is just something weird I've noted, but Kaplan's going to give Bulk and Skull detention for failing an exam? Dude, detention is for those who break the rules. In what twisted totalitarian world does getting bad grades in high school warrant punishment by anyone other than your parents? Or do they do stupid things in class that results in their teachers auto-failing them to get such isolation? As from other episodes, it appears as if detention is a mainstay to their existence. But if that's true, then how the hell do they ever find the time to even bug the Rangers or anyone else in the first place if that is all they're stuck doing?
There's a simple explanation for that.
Oh, this I've got to hear. I knew it was coming, and yet I still fell for it.
To flee or not to flee has the Rangers trying to raise money as Ernie's going bankrupt?
Seriously? The dude runs the most successful business in the city and regularly rents out his floor space to every event under the sun. He remodels the place twice in 4 years and expands his ownership to a beachside restaurant before he's written off the show in Turbo. And I doubt the Rangers he gives free food to are putting that much of a stress on his expenses. Dude has gotta be bad with money.
Well, that may have come about from later episodes, as the subplot of this one involves a lost dog its owner will pay a gratuitous sum for its return. Yeah, lost pet rewards don't work that way. Who becomes host to Rita's flea monster and its magic-biting agents. They cure it, kill the flea, return the dog to its owner. Ernie gets the cast reward, hangout saved! Reign of the Jellyfish has yet another school plot as the focus, with the group gathering things to be placed in a time capsule, which Rita tries to steal. What purpose could Rita really serve by trying to take it? Immortalize herself? If she wins, she'd probably still be in charge in the future. If she loses, then whatever she'd place in it would only be a monument to all her recorded sins. Yeah, this is another stupid plot. Not helped in how the monster attack and fight in no way actually relates to this stupid time capsule which, by it being a flimsy plastic bubble, would probably break long before it was intended to be opened.
You know, I hope that the people who open this time capsule in the future live in a peaceful and friendly world.
Well, depending on what you treat as canon, thanks a lot for causing that needless divide, Jonathan Zacher, it's either a few isolated cities amongst widespread wasteland, or it's a few isolated cities amongst a widespread wasteland. Take your pick on your continuity endpoint.
Plague of the Mantis is surprisingly one of Trini's few spotlight episodes, based on her learning a new martial arts skill from observing a cricket, and then fighting the monster with honor, or some other such crap. Once again, it's not a good episode, continuing the streak of poor content in Zoo 2. Which brings us to Return of an Old Friend, which begins with Rita kidnapping the group's families when they're all out for a family-themed school event, and using a mole with hypnosis powers to indoctrinate Billy into stealing the Dragon Dagger from the command center. After freeing Billy from this, and Goldar subsequently sending the Dragon Zord on a rampage, he orders them to give up their power coins in order to save these hostages from her whims, which they reluctantly do, meaning evil wins! However, Goldar forgot 1 coin. Meaning...
Yeah, with the show now commissioning their own stock footage, it was pretty much a no-brainer to bring back in Tommy Oliver and make him a regular team member that the Z-Ranger footage had restricted from happening properly.
The time with Jason has pretty much left it entirely severed from the Green Candle or Rita, thus permitting Zordon to partially recharge its energies enough for Tommy to be able to morph again. But now, not only is he weaker than before, the energy infusion is pretty unstable, and is first shown waning 10 episodes later, during the events of the mutiny. Though, to pull back a moment to the parents thing, it is an oddity how only Bulk and Kimberly's parents are quote-unquote normal, and how they don't seem as if they are just carbon copies of their kids, or the other way around. Though the fact that Kimberly's parents are divorced, her mother being remarried, and her bearing a strained relationship with her stepdad are details that would more play into things in Season 3.
Personal anecdote, however. When I was 5, around when this episode actually aired, my parents were undergoing separation to lead into their divorce, something I learned later was a long time coming. But back then, I was feeling emotions similar to those showcased by Kimberly and how she felt them splitting was somehow her fault, and the reassurance presented that it wasn't was something I ended up needing and taking to heart. Thank you for that, Shel Danielson.
Anyways, Grumblebee features the titular bee, and a costume that'd be seen again in space, while Billy deals with getting a B on an exam.
Nerd!
Yeah, that's seriously all that happens, as is the problem with the Zoo 2 run of Season 1. It's just even more of a narrative excuse to set up the stock footage fights instead of setting up and integrating the story points they would before get from the Sentai material. In Two Heads Are Better Than One, these titles, there's a reason I usually just go by the numbers, Finster creates a monster with 2 brains, thus is twice as likely to fail from its infighting, which they defeat by giving it a fruit to distract it. I really don't like how this plot point is brought up even more out of the blue than Zordon-based exposition, as at least he has the excuse of being the wise head in a tube dispensing information or advice that is pretty much all he can do. The fruit thing is a one-off potential idea to its defeat, not even presented seriously, and yet it's what they go with to distract it? The hell? But the bird theme just keeps rolling with foul play.
That pun was bad and you should feel bad.
Anyways, Zack manages to catch Angela's attention again, likely after she cooled off from being stood up, with the woman giving him a shot after he performs for some kids, which is once again threatened by a monster attack, but further complicated by Zack not being able to join the others to fight due to not being able to leave and allay suspicion about his secret identity. Trick or Treat puts Kimberly in a similar story about not being able to leave easily, as she gets to be a contestant on a game show, but is relevant for our purposes as it gives the last names of Tommy, Kim, and Skull, though the game show is in and of itself a head-scratching mashup of The Price is Right, and those weird last-of-season themed contest shows that networks ran through like M&M's in the 90s.
On the other hand, I kinda see the idea seeds for the Hillhurst monsters from Beetleborgs being born from the excess of Spencer's Halloween stores they must have cleaned out for all the various thematic costumes and props they accumulated.
It's another odd story, though, mainly as the contest feeds directly into the monster thematic of being a pumpkin, though apparently the episode ran long, so the intended Megazord fight was recycled down the line as new footage.
Also, I see what you did there with Skull's costume, Power Rangers. Did Jason Narvi ever perform in Les Miserables? Think he might have done Javert more justice than Russell Crowe.
Though that does make things more amusing in reflection when one later learns he's a classically trained pianist. Guess his punk parents have an appreciation for classical works. Second Chance is sadly a kid plot. When adapting from a Sentai full of them, it's inevitable even the original scripts generate them, with Zack and Jason helping a kid gain the ability to join a youth soccer team Ernie's organizing.
Oh, so the reason he almost went bankrupt is because he funneled all his money into youth activity programs.
This in turn inspires Rita to attack with an armadillo monster, which of course ties in as it rolls into a soccer ball, while Tommy's mostly indisposed due to damage to his communicator. On Fins and Needles, honestly feels pretty uncomfortable in reflection on the show's behind-the-scenes issues, with Jason and Tommy affected by a spell that leaves them at each other's throats.
In a way, their dialogue is kind of biting, and be used as commentary against the show.
The Power Rangers were doing just fine before you showed up.
That's what quitters do.
You know what? I'd rather be a quitter than watch you show off every afternoon for the rest of my life. Hey, why don't we make this interesting? If I destroy the shark, I take over as leader of the Power Rangers. And if I get it first, you turn in your power coin. Fine, fine!
See? makes it more uncomfortable to watch with how it foreshadows the shifts that would later take place, implying a lot of this was more personal than it's supposed to be.
Enter the Lizinator. Is of course based around a farcical parody of Arnold Schwarzenegger in monster form, complete with fake Austrian accents.
You are no match for me, puny Power Ranger.
We are here to pop. You are.
Its Terminator steel-like hide prevents most of the Ranger's attacks from affecting it for a time, until they eventually overwhelm it together. What's odd about this episode is the B-plot revolving around Kim's cousin, a would-be cheerleader, and how she was inspired by Kimberly's apparently still talked about cheerleading skill to get into the sport, despite being bad at it. Except, Kim's not a cheerleader.
Except for one place. The series Bible and original character descriptors. Apparently the gymnast thing was easier to write for as a basis behind her physical ability, so they mostly dropped it.
Thing is, though, this is just a citation of how the show over time shoves the teens into doing everything they can under the freaking sun that it overwhelms such aspects of their characters, which is again reflected in the following episode, Football Season, and yet another Cheryl Saban script, where the guys try out for the football team, despite such sports being a massive time sink which people that spend their off time saving the world from a witch on the moon should know better than to commit to. On top of everything else they commit to, like their volunteer classes at the youth center. At least with the volunteer efforts, it's an easier means to do a one-and-done story. But the plot for this one literally is Tommy and Bulk training to get on the football team. Bulk prancing around like a ballerina, and Tommy getting trained by Ernie in how to adapt his martial arts to the tactics of a professional sport. To the point he makes quarterback.
The ironic bit of this was an easy way to divert the whole Bulk and Skull antics and try to really shift the character, with them honestly wanting to get involved with something Bulk might be good at. But it's instead a citation of the literal savants this group has to be to do, everything they do.
And what's worse, Zack and Trini, as said, have the least development or spotlight, so it might have made more sense not to shove this onto Tommy yet again, but give it to Zack in another Getting Good with Angela plot. Stuff like this is used as an example of how Tommy crowded out the others of the show, as even when they had opportunities to use other characters in these superfluous will not matter ever again plots, they just kept going back to him. A rotation in who does what more balances the characters and makes stuff like this more manageable, such as Tanya and TJ having baseball as an interest, or Carlos and Connor having soccer. Shane, Tori, and Dustin in Ninja Storm had skateboarding, surfing, and motocross respectively, which they did in their free time. And it felt more natural as it wasn't being shoved together with all these different activities used as diversions by such points, but informed them as people. Tommy, and by proxy Jason, already have that through their passions as martial artists, so they don't need that stuff piled on top of that.
It's more mediated in later seasons where such are more by-the-day activities, but it gets damn irritating here since most of Zoo 2 is superfluous plots like this, one after another, where from the setup you would expect them to have more of a payoff, instead of just slamming the reset button.
Still, as the season closed, we did get at least one more good episode, Mighty Morphin Mutants, which returns to the Ranger Copies plot and how Goldar trains a group of elite putties, and a monster, to take on Ranger facsimile powers to face the team on even terms.
Okay, I may have misjudged saying it's a good episode, as immediately it falls into the plot hole of how the hell did Rita create these powers in the first place? Especially since the badges of darkness they used for this come the fuck out of nowhere when they would have been very useful to use previously. Just like the Green Candle.
But since she had the Green Ranger coin for, centuries, it wouldn't be surprising if she learned something about how it worked and tried to forge her own facsimiles from that garnered knowledge, thus tapping into the same core Morphin grid energies to create her knockoffs.
I'm just stretching as I actually enjoy this one, and it's the last good Evil Rangers episode we'd get until the Psycho Ranger arc.
And amusingly, I now recognize the evil counterpart weapons the Mutant Rangers are wielding. They're the legendary weapons. I see what you did there, Toei. The civilian B-plot is actually pretty decent, too, on addressing one's flaws and finding ways to correct them. The episode making fun of Tommy and how he's always forgetting things. which, if we look back, is a track record of his the episode only slightly exaggerates. But otherwise, it's an overall good time, both sides evenly showing themselves and their competency. It's arguable, however, whether the last episode of the season is a high or low note, though, as Zack finally gets his date with Angela, a double date with Tommy and Kim, which is how many prefer to remember it, which concludes Zack's only story arc of the series, and the end of Angela's appearances in the show, as Rita sends an oyster-themed monster after pearls that can freeze people in space.
No, not like that!
In order to delay everyone from stopping the monster from actually boiling away the ocean, and thus killing all life on the planet. But as everyone else is frozen, it's up to solely Zack and Tommy to save everyone, resulting in, well, the creation of the Armed Mammoth Ranger. Which, credit where it's due, is an awesome thing to give to one of the two least spotlighted characters of the original team, and gives one of the few instances of mecha fights under the water, and done in a way I last remember seeing in Showa Kamen Rider. But on the other hand, in comparison to Doomsday, it feels like the season ended at more of an anticlimax than with a team in triumph, and otherwise in reserve to await the next thread that come from Lord Zedd only 2 months later.
As there have been so many Power Rangers seasons after this one that are just so much better in storytelling, character development, investment, and production quality, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1 is 3 out of 10. You have to do worse than this season to actually be a bad Power Ranger season, and is, in my opinion, the worst of the 3 Mighty Morphin seasons. It is not aged well, but is still watchable.
In comparison to so many great series that came after it, it is, as I have said previously, not high on the totem pole. And really, I think the Zoo 2 episodes inflating the number of bad episodes more than anything drags it down than balancing out as a 4 or 5 rating on my personal ranking of entries in the franchise. And some of its content is straight up embarrassing.
Otherwise, much like Zoo Ranger, it's mostly harmless.
Its importance to laying the groundwork for the Zordon era's themology and the ongoing story that follows in seasons 2, 3, Zeo, Turbo, and In Space necessitates that it be watched. But you can more easily skip around the show, as most of the stories are standalone and don't really matter outside of the action scenes, as there's little lasting impact. And doing so honestly makes it far more watchable, as it cuts down on the stupid stories, whereas the opportunity to do that in seasons that follow become less and less. Otherwise, you might miss something related to story points or characters that, in the legitimately bad seasons, you just need to suffer through. The characters here are rather two-dimensional, and while they do gain nuance, it's nothing significant. Though in its favor, it's also not anything that makes you hate them, which puts it far above the annoying nuisance characters Sentai just loves to generate as part of the bad parts of its humor. But they can just be bland and stock, where we've grown past that in most modern series. It's not the only series to suffer from that, however. Transformers, G.I. Joe, Ninja Turtles, lots of shows back then were more interested in just situations of the week with certain character archetypes present than having a depth to the characters. That's simply how shows were done back then in the West, and that Power Rangers evolved for the times outside of the worst entries, I will always see as a good thing. But I'm not an individual that becomes blinded by nostalgia, and overall the series as a whole is not that great, even with the gems in it such as the Green Ranger arc. Z-Ranger's fantasy theme is mostly forgotten, a semblance of the magic versus technology dynamic being seen, but just as often the Rangers rely on magic as technology, though much of their victories do come from being intelligent, trained, or otherwise skilled enough to overcome the brought challenges. Honestly, Ron Wasserman's music is the best part of it, and holds up a lot of the poor to bad dialogue, and makes you want to sit through the mindless action sequences just to hear it, as this was long before the tracks were available in any form but the show.
And I personally do view it better than Zoo Ranger in most respects. The filler outside the bad episodes is enjoyably fun. You get to know the characters even though they don't develop. There's a lot of legitimate drama, and it kicked off a lot of good content. Another season of which I will be discussing before the year ends. No, it's not going to be the one you're thinking of.
You know, Bulk and Skull should get their own TV show.
They actually put together a test pilot for that. To quote Jason Narvey, no one bought it. Probably because instead of it something showing off their talent as actors and comedians, it was a Power Rangers clip show. Way to shoot yourself in the foot, Saban.